Barnes and Noble and Amazon and on Sassy Magic website because I own some shops here in New Orleans, and also through Llewellyn, of course. So the book is about, as it sounds, living vampires. So I do some of the traditional things that just need to be done. I talk about myths versus realities. I talk about different ways that vampires feed and how they take in energy and why they need energy. I talk about what makes a person a vampire versus somebody who might be vampiric, where they take in energy, but they don't necessarily need it to function in a healthy way, in a permanent way. I talk about entities that are vampiric, and then I talk about entities that are vampires. So I talk about all that in the book. I introduce some vampire magic that has not, to my knowledge, been published before. And then I also have 3 chapters on what's called the Kheprian Order, which is an order of vampires that some people might be familiar with, but for the most part, people aren't. And so there's some new lights shed on that order and what it's all about, and some of the magic that we do. And so I'm pretty excited to share that book with the world. I think definitely gonna have some lovers and some haters when that book comes out, and I'm okay with that. I think you're doing it right when you have both. And so I'm really excited for it to come out and share that with people. And that's August of next year. So that's book 2. And I'm working on book 3 right now over the holidays. Nice. So
that's awesome. Busy.
Yes, exactly.
Very cool.
So what inspired, I mean, I know, but at least I have an idea, but for our listeners, what inspired that book specifically? What made you want to create it?
So I have a number of books in my head that I wanted to get out. There's close to 10 of them. And this was one of the earlier ones I wanted to get out. And what actually happened when I started writing originally, I realized that I was actually writing 3 books. And one was going to be Magic Without Tools, one was going to be on vampirism, and one is still a secret. I'm not going to share what that one is. But I realized I was writing 3. And so I stopped and I focused on Magic Without Tools. And then once it was done, then I focused on the Living Vampire book. So the inspiration is pretty similar. I wanted to get a message out there. I feel I've got something to say. Some of the stuff, we'll see some similarities with certain authors, but most of it's pretty brand new. And I wanted to kind of turn the idea that some people have of vampirism a little bit on its head, and again, come at it from my lens. So that's part of the inspiration. Part of the inspiration too is to help people, people that are interested in vampirism, or people that might be just awakening as a vampire and they need assistance. So it's to help people awaken and learn about it in general. And just dispelling the myths, because vampirism often gets a bit of a bad rap. So trying to show people that you can actually engage in it ethically and how you do that.
That's very cool.
Really cool.
Is there how would you best for somebody I'm going to be honest with you, I'm completely ignorant to vampirism or vampires in general. I mean, I understand a little bit about it. I've heard the term energy vampire, you know what I mean? I understand that there are some people that interact in a way that they have other people where they use lancets maybe to kind of take a little bit of blood in, which is with a willing partner. But can you kind of describe for somebody like myself who is completely ignorant to the subject, what that kind of looks like to be a vampire and what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, of course, you're going to get different opinions from different people. So this is my opinion. Some people will agree and some will not. To me, vampirism is where a person or being, because it can be an entity as well, has the fundamental need, the permanent fundamental need to exchange vital energy because they're not producing enough of it themselves. So there's some key factors there: permanent, fundamental, and vital energy. So as human beings, we all exchange energy all the time. Living things just exchange energy all the time, but it's a different type of energy that we're exchanging. So vampires need to exchange this vital energy because there's not enough of it being produced in the vampire system, if you will, in the vampire subtle body or energetic anatomy. So that's how I would describe it. In the book, I differentiate that between people or beings that are vampiric. Anybody with some skill can be vampiric. They can drain energy from other people or from other things. That's just an acquired skill that people can do. That's being vampiric, but they don't have that permanent fundamental need because of a lack of vital life force. So that's where vampiric versus vampire. I kind of blur the lines a little bit when I talk about vampirism as a practice, where they call themselves vampires and they are kind of vampires, but they're also not, because it's not a fundamental need. So they're kind of in the weird gray area. And I talk about that in the book. So I kind of put it into 3 different categories: vampiric, vampires with the fundamental need, and then practicing vampires, where they practice it only as a system of magic. So they don't have that fundamental need, but they're practicing something that looks almost identical.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. All right. And have you been doing this? I mean, I'm assuming that this has been something that's been in your life for a long time.
Yeah, so I've been awakened since I was 17. So goodness gracious, that's 35 years now. So yeah, 35 years. So it's been a while. It's definitely been a while. Yeah, which is another reason why I wanted to write the book, because I look at things and a lot of the information that we have out there is still the same from 25 years ago. And I just think it was time for something new. I've got the good luck and the good fortune that a lot of other people have kind of, blazed the trail in terms of some vampirism books too. And so I have the good fortune to follow in their footsteps, as opposed to be blazing the trail. I'm blazing some new stuff, but I get to follow in people's footsteps too a little bit.
Blazing the trail is never a bad thing, like you said. It's always a cool thing to kind of set yourself apart from other people and just get your version of things out there, which is cool. I admire that for sure.
Thank you.
Do you ever find that obviously Hollywood portrays things very drastically, right?
Yeah.
Is there ever a Hollywood movie or ever a take on maybe pop culture that actually gets it right?
Yes. There's one called The Order with Heath Ledger, and it's a sin eater. There's a sin eater in it, and when he's eating the sins, there's these tendrils of energy coming up from the person, and those tendrils of energy are how I perceive the energy of the energy exchange, or when a vampire is feeding. So that was very accurately portrayed in terms of like the energetic taking in. Having said that, sin eating has nothing to do with vampirism. I'm just using that as an example because they do it really well with the cinematography. And then the other one that gets it right, I swear they have an energy a vampire on their team. What We Do in the Shadows, the TV show with Colin Robertson. I don't want to do spoilers for people in case they haven't watched it, but other than the levitation, glowing eyes, and how he comes back to life, everything else is pretty darn accurate in terms of certain types of vampirism. Now, he's not necessarily very ethical, so it's kind of unethical in terms of what he does, but his reactions and how he goes about things, and one of the ways that he feeds, there are vampires that do it that way. There's other ways too that are way more ethical, but they do get it right. I've met vampires that are like Colin Robertson. So again, without the glowing eyes, without the levitating, and how he comes back to life, it's pretty accurate.
I'm going to have to watch it because I haven't seen it yet.
It's really interesting. Yeah, there's definitely one scene. They're at a city council scene. Again, I don't want to do spoilers for people, but just his reaction is basically, they've got somebody on their team that knows about vampirism. It's really funny.
That's at least they did their homework, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's a great show. It's a really funny show. So if you like vampires, you should absolutely watch What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah, I definitely will. I'm always fascinated by that stuff. So yeah,
it's a fun show.
Nice.
But yeah, so those two get it. I don't know. Nothing else comes to mind off the top of my head that's really accurate.
Sure. Yeah.
So The Order and What We Do in the Shadows.
Yes, the TV show What We Do in the Shadows. I can't remember if the movie does or not, but the TV series, and then The Order just for the energy tendrils. And The Order is just a really interesting movie in general. That if people are curious about sin eating and kind of this macabre, dark Catholic thing going on, it's a really cool movie to watch.
Killer. All right.
So you had mentioned sin eating a little bit. Can you tell us about that? That's a new concept for me.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So again, to reiterate, sin eating has nothing to do with vampirism at all. They're two completely separate things. I just happen to also be a sin eater. So the quick version, because I do talks on this for an hour, or I just talk about sin eating for an hour. So the quick version, though, is that sin eating is something that we see in Wales, Western England, so in the Welsh Marches area, which is like the Shropshire area, that sort of thing. Shropshire is like their version of a state, or Canadian version of a province, as well as some places in Scotland. And we see it come out in written record a few decades after the Church of England split from the Catholic Church. And so one of the theories is that sin eating came about because they're like, well, now we don't have the sacrament of confession. How do we save people, make sure that they go to heaven? So that's one theory about how sin eating originated. Another theory is that it's as old as Christianity itself. Another one likens the sin eater to the goat in Leviticus, the scapegoat. And so the sin eater is the human scapegoat. And so then it's as old as Judaism. And then there's other people like myself that subscribe to the theory that it's actually much older, and that it's just a tiny remnant of a Greco-Egyptian mystery tradition. So that's what I believe. I don't really have a lot of proof to back it up. but that's what I believe. And those are the different theories. Those are the different hypotheses. So what would happen, though, is when somebody was dying or when they were dead, the people would call on the local sin eater or the village sin eater, the closest one, to come and essentially consume a ritual meal over the corpse. And so the meal would be bread and salt and usually ale, but some sort of liquid, usually alcohol, but not always. Sometimes it would be milk. And sometimes there'd also be cheese. And they would use these special wooden bowls, and they would consume this ritual meal over the corpse. And while they were doing that, they would recite 2 secret charms, and then they would recite one out loud that everybody would hear. And if you research sin eating online, that's the public charm you're going to find. And basically, while they do this, so Elena's saying it believes much older because it seems to be in every culture. So Elena made a really interesting thing. There's death rituals in every culture that are similar, but sin eating specifically is in the Welsh, English, Scottish area. But there's very similar things all over the world. Elaine is absolutely correct. Hopefully I pronounced that name correctly. So the ritual itself is extraction magic, and it's also mechanical magic. So there's 2 things about that. Extraction means you're pulling something out. And so the sin eater is literally pulling, or the ritual is pulling the sins out of the person into the sin eater. So there's a transference of the sins from one to the other.
Okay.
So that's the extraction magic. It's mechanical magic because once you start the ritual, it just runs itself. It requires no skill. It requires no magical aptitude. I can teach anybody as long as they can speak, as long as they can eat. They can be a sin eater in an hour. I can teach them how to be a sin eater in an hour. Anybody at all. So it requires no skill at all. So that's why it's mechanical magic as well. Mechanical magic was very common in certain areas of Europe, where it was designed so that anybody without any magical aptitude could perform certain rituals. So this extraction ritual happens, the sins are transferred to the sin eater, and the idea being is that now, uncle whoever or aunt whoever isn't going to come back as a ghost, so no haunting the family. They're not going to come back as a vampire because you don't want them eating you, and they're also going to go to heaven. So that was the traditional sin eating, kind of in a nutshell. Today, I interpret the sin as basically what we consider wrong. So Chris, you're going to have things you consider are wrong. I'm going to have things that I consider are wrong. Raven's got things. We're going to overlap, but not completely necessarily. And to me, whatever we consider wrong separates us from the divine. So the sin eater removes those things that we consider wrong to help get us right with the divine, whether that's God, goddess, creator, whatever it is, source, gets us right with it and gets us wherever we're supposed to go, whether that's heaven, Valhalla, reincarnate again, whatever we're supposed to do. So that's how I look at what the sin eater is doing. So I'm a traditional sin eater. I'm public and I'm verified. That's why I say I'm the world's only traditional public verified sin eater, because I do it the traditional ritual, as opposed to a lot of modern sin eaters who basically just take energy. It's really cool what they do. They take energy and they'll try and ease suffering and they'll ease pain in people by using basically vampiric techniques to help them. So that's, I guess, maybe modern sin eating overlaps vampirism a little bit, depending on how you look at it.
That's cool. Stacia has a question too. She says, how long after death can this be done?
So that's a great question. So we've experimented with this. Let me do the math with my fingers again. March, April, May, June, July. So 7 months for sure. I've done it on a dead body 7 months later. So it can be done at least 7 months. My next experiment is that I'd like to do it on somebody who's been cremated, so on their ashes. I suspect it would work. And if that's the case, then there shouldn't be a time limit at that point. Right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, you would think. Yeah.
Yeah. So then you've got some really interesting things where if you know where your ancestors are buried, you can actually start doing some ancestral healing. Because if it works on the ashes, then we can go back those 6 generations and heal our own ancestors through sin eating. So it's got some interesting connotations and possibilities. But I haven't found anybody that wants me to do the ritual on ashes yet to be able to confirm that it would work that way.
Right.
Yeah. So right now, confirmed 7 months.
Could you maybe compare that to like rescue mediums, I guess? In the sense that they kind of help them transition to a more light, or to the light rather.
Again, it's kind of like your chaos magic thing. I think there's overlap.
Yeah, overlaps. But...
Yeah, I think it's got background noise.
Uh-oh.
I think it's different. Because I do that too. Like I'll help sometimes when I'll see a spirit that wants help crossing over. I'll literally, well, literally and figuratively, because of course it's not physically, kind of take their hand and then cross a liminal space to help them cross over and help that be a way of them understanding that it's time to cross, because we'll cross the street or we'll cross some sort of threshold. And so in that case, you're taking the spirit with their consent and almost showing them the door. Whereas with sin eating, it's the consent of the family. So the sin eater needs the family to ask. So it's not necessarily the dead person's consent. Hopefully you have it, but it's the family's consent. And you're helping them get to wherever they need to go more quickly, but not necessarily showing them the door. Hang
on a second, Sean. I suddenly, Raven popped out and I can't hear you now. Gwen, can you pop on for a second? Just make sure we can hear you and everything's good. It's always technical difficulties, Sean. I apologize.
No worries.
Gwen, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear her, Sean?
Okay, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
So I cannot.
Okay. Hold on just a minute.
I'm going to try to pop back out and come back in.
Yes, do
now
that.
That Raven's
Raven,
back.
You good?
Can you hear Raven? Thumbs up if you can.
No. Raven?
All right. Uno momento.
Yeah.
There we go. I got it.
I can hear Raven now. Yes.
I can hear Raven now.
Okay. Yeah.
I apologize. I had to hit a button.
I have gremlins on, I swear, every show. But Sean, I had something interesting about your sin eater thing. I was a paramedic way back, and there was a lady I used to transport who was very old. She was close to 100 years old, and she was sitting there. And the biggest thing with her was to get her to the hospital and keep her comfortable. But she connected with me, and she would ask for me, and I would hold her hand and just be sweet to her. And she told me one time, she said, you're going to go on, but you're not going to be a medic forever, and you're going to do something more spiritual. Okay. And she told me, she said, you're a sin eater. And I was like, what do you mean? And back then I didn't know what so I researched it. So you're talking about it. And I thought it's just very interesting.
That's interesting. I see a question too from somebody. Well, mention that.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
There's other schools of thought on sin eating, that some people are born sin eaters. And it's actually, I don't want to get the culture wrong. I think it's the Amish. It's one of those kind of groups that are in the US. I believe it's the Amish, where they believe that there's born sin eaters. And there's definitely a very similar way that they do the ritual, but it's private. They're never public about it. And that's why I'm always very careful what I say: public, verified, traditional. Right. And they do it a little bit differently in terms of what they believe. And so when I was talking to a person who knew about that, because they were from that group, we almost said it's almost like different denominations, where you have different denominations of Christianity. You almost seem to have these offshoots of sin eating, because that one was really similar. So one of the questions was, is the sin eater eating the sins of the person? And yes, the sin eater is eating. So as you eat the bread and the salt and drink the beer, you're consuming the sins of the person as well. And so that's why sin eaters, kind of like a leper, were considered unclean. And so after the ritual, they would be driven from the home, because nobody wanted to touch this person that had all these sins inside them and on them. So after that, there's discussion about what sin eaters did to get rid of it. And one of the things is that they would throw up to expel the sins. And then the other one was that they'd throw the sins into a river. And both are true and both are not. And I'll quickly explain why. Most of the people that did sin eating were destitute. So back then, that was a meal. You're not throwing up a meal deliberately, typically speaking. But throwing the sins into a river requires skill. That actually requires magical aptitude. You can't just grab onto a certain part of energy and throw it into a river unless you know what you're doing. And so when I did the sin eating ritual for the first time, and I'm trained to withstand kind of like a magical beating. I'm trained to withstand a lot of forces. And when I did the ritual for the first time, I almost threw up. And so I'm like, okay, so somebody who's not trained might have thrown up because it was just too much for the body. Because, as humans, this is kind of weird, right, to be doing this. And so I think they were throwing up, but not because they wanted to, because they just couldn't handle it. But people would see them and be like, oh, they're getting rid of the sins. It's kind of a logical conclusion. And then for the water, my theory is, I don't have a lot of it in terms of like proof of this, but I think there might have been two streams of sin eating. One where they were actually initiated and trained, and one where they were just kind of like taught really quickly, and then, okay, Godspeed, God is speed, go do your thing, right? So I don't have proof of that, but it would explain why we have both things going on, throwing into the river and people vomiting. So that's what I suspect. But yeah, so to answer that person's question, yeah, you take on the sins of the person that you are, or the corpse or the being that you're eating the sins of. You're literally taking their sins on. So that's why they think it's like the scapegoat.
Yeah, it fascinates me. Like I said, that's how I even thought about the words. You know, I didn't know that existed, and when she said that to me, I looked it up. I've never had anything to do with anything like that, but it interests me, and I've researched it. Do you do the certain plate that has the energy on it to put the bread and everything on, the salt and the beer?
So they would use what's called marzelwood bowls, which is a certain type of maple. I haven't researched enough yet in terms of history to know if that was just the common bowls in like bowl and platter that they would use back then, or if that was specific for the sin eaters. I suspect it was just common or relatively common back then.
Right.
So what I do is I use a wooden bowl and a wooden platter, because they never say cup. They always say bowl and platter. So I use a platter for the bread, and I use a bowl for the beer, and I use wood. And if I can, I'll use maple wood. So, and this is the thing, like a purist will be like, well, that's not completely traditional. And you're like, you know what? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Sin eaters would be paid a few pence. I've updated that to be today's currency, but coins in whatever country you're in. So I'm not asking people to get me the English pence, get American quarters or Canadian loonies and toonies, $1 and $2 coins. So I've modernized it in that sense, just to be reasonable. And somebody else could say, well, that's still not completely traditional. And like, they're not wrong. I'd say about 95% traditional, and then a little bit just reasonable. Like, am I going to make them go to a currency exchange and get pence to give it to me? Or am I just going to make them give me coins? Somebody else could, say, well, just get them to do dollar bills. And like, I feel like that's not traditional enough. So there's a slope, right? There's a scale of traditionalness, and mine's pretty darn traditional. it's pretty, as much as it can be. And as much as we know about the ritual, it's as true as reasonably speaking we can do. For the ritual. So.
Well, I find it very interesting, and I'm gonna quit taking over the show now. So I'm gonna be back in the background, guys.
All right, I can hear you guys again, so we're good.
Good. Raven, are you good? Can you hear?
Yeah, I'm good. I can hear.
You can hear Chris too.
Yep.
We'll see. If you pop out and I can't hear anything, then we'll.
Well, just call me back. I'm back here. Just call me
That's
back.
All right. I'll bounce in and out if that happens. But yeah.
All right.
All right. I think we're still good.
I think we are.
All right. It sounds good. It's a victory.
So,
can you hear Raven?
I can. I'm just comment really quick.
Now I can't hear Raven. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness.
I can see the little thing blipping that she's talking, but hang on. Raven, you take over. I'll be right back.
So what when it comes to vampirism, like what were key factors that helped you to realize that you are a vampire?
Yeah, and then I also want to address the latest comment from about 15 minutes ago, because it's a really important one to clarify. For me, I actually read Rosemary Ellen Guiley's Vampires Among Us, and I read it, and I'm like, these are my people, but not exactly, but close. that's basically okay. So Wolfpack says that they can hear all of us, so that's good. So at least the audience can hear all of us.
Now hopefully I can hear you guys. Raven, can you say something?
Yep, I'm here.
We're back. Woohoo!
We're back.
All right.
So, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there, because I was checking other comments. Where were we going, guys? Steer me back.
You were just talking about Vampires Among Us.
Oh yeah, how I realized. Thank you. So
yeah.
Vampires Among Us was a huge eye opener for me, and I read that as a teenager, but still wasn't really sure. I grew up in a small town. In what was considered the beginning of northern Canada, so it's fairly rural, and didn't really have a lot of information, and knew nobody else like me. I had the other weird kids with me, and some of them were into magic, and one of my friends was a medium. But other than that, didn't really have any frame of reference until I got to university. And that's kind of, once I got to university, then I got exposed to a lot more ideas and schools of thought about it. So that's when I got exposed to a group called the Temple of the Vampire. I looked into them. I'm like, nope, this isn't me either. And this is not for me. This is not, the direction I'm going in, but it helped kind of expose me. So it took time, Raven. It took time for me to kind of, what I would call, fully awaken. I would say that I really wasn't. And awakening to me is also an ongoing process. I'd say I'm still awakening today. So that the idea of you're always learning. But I'd say the main thing would have been 1999. So it took me almost 10 years. It took me from 17 until I was 26, so almost 10 years to kind of fully come into my own and understand, have a basic understanding of what was going on. Elena was saying, well, you could also, I guess, talking about the branches of sexual energy vampires versus just vampires who feed off the energy. So this is what I talk about this pretty extensively in the book. I come at it from the frame of reference that vampires are just vampires. That I describe sanguinarians. So Chris had alluded to that earlier when he was talking about people that are drinking blood. I talk about sexual vampires, elemental vampires, pranic vampires, all these other vampires, all these other essentially feeding techniques or mediums that vampires use. And I say ultimately it's all about the energy. And so we can talk about it that way. And sometimes people will identify that way. And the way that I look at it is kind of like identifying as vegetarian or vegan, or sometimes it's just identifying as, well, I eat steak versus I eat pork chops, in terms of the energy that the vampire is consuming. And so I'm trying to push a little bit, gently push the idea that vampires are just vampires. And then they all have their preferences as to how they exchange energy and take in energy. And certainly sexually is a very common one for a lot of vampires, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
That's amazing.
Raven, did that more or less answer your question though for earlier about how I kind of came into it?
Absolutely, it does. That actually is pretty much how I can see others maybe being able to cue into that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about, you had talked about different forms, like elemental versus, like the physical. You said sanguine. Sorry, I'm terrible. The consuming of blood.
Yep. Yep.
Can you describe a little bit of the history of that and the ethical practices surrounding that? Because I'm very curious about what separates the ethical versus the unethical when it comes to that regard. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'm not an expert on sanguinarian vampirism because I don't do that. I don't consume blood. So I want to put a caveat right away. There are some amazing experts on it that are fairly well known. They're pretty public within the vampire community. We have one of them here in New Orleans. So it's just that caveat. So having said that, sanguinarian feeding always requires consent. Full stop. There's no, but what about, what if, what this, what that? No. Sanguinarian feeding, because you are puncturing the person, right? Whether it's with a needle or with a lancet, scalpel, that sort of thing, there is a puncturing of the person. So it always requires consent. There's no gray area about that or not. Vampires argue about the different levels of feeding and whether or not they require consent. And there's arguments. Some it's very agreed on, some it's not agreed on. However, with blood feeding, it's always requires consent. That's it. I've never met anybody credible who thinks otherwise. So that's really important to note.
That's really good to know, though.
Yeah, that's super important. Because I'm not an expert in blood feeding, I don't want to focus on it too much because I talk about it in the book, but not a lot. But in general, if this is something that somebody's looking at, you need to do your research about safe areas to engage that in. Unlike the TV shows and stuff like that, you never draw blood in neck areas and things like that. So there's certain areas that you can, and it's fairly well documented online. There's ways you need to go about making sure that you're not introducing any bacteria into the wound. So cleaning it before and after. There's safety protocols that are kind of similar to having a sexual partner in terms of like having people be tested and making sure that they don't have anything that you might get if you're drinking that blood, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of safety stuff that goes into sanguinarian feeding that isn't necessarily required with energetic feeding. I am one of the people, which will make me either popular or unpopular depending on who you talk to. I am one of the people that believes that sanguinarians are actually taking the energy in the blood, that it's not the blood that they need. So I absolutely believe that it's the energy in the blood that they're taking in, and that the blood for them is just the medium, just like for a sexual vampire or a vampire who engages in sex when they feed, their sex is the medium, that sort of thing. So again, that's why I liken everybody they're vampires.
Sure.
And then it's more about what tickles your fancy, or however you get it the best way for you. And again, do you have a consenting partner or not? That sort of thing.
That's a great way to look at it. I thank you for sharing that, because like I said, I hate to admit it, and maybe I don't hate to admit it, but I am very ignorant when it comes to this sort of stuff. So it's truly fascinating for me. But so thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, it's amazing how, like, we have this perspective, we get this Hollywood perspective of what vampirism is, and then we actually get to meet people that are true, authentic, real vampires, and they have certain guidelines and things that they go by. And I think that a lot of people from childhood, youth, on up will question whether this is a real thing or not, and it definitely is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, anybody who's done magic for a while knows that they can be vampiric. I've talked to many capable magical practitioners. They all know that you can be vampiric. So then the question is there a state of being where you actually need the energy to function in a healthy way? That really becomes the only question, because anybody who's done magic for a while knows you can siphon energy from other people. So we all know it's a thing. It's just the big question mark. And hopefully my book will answer that is there an existence where people need it just to function day to day, differently than the typical human being?
It's interesting.
Yeah, definitely. There's a question that comes up: is drinking the blood the same as, oh my goodness, how do I?
Adrenochrome. I don't even know what adrenochrome is. So I can't answer that. I don't know what that is.
Hopefully they can clarify in the comments, but yeah, that'd be interesting to know.
Yeah. So what are now you live in New Orleans and you have 2 stores out there, correct?
3 stores now.
Very good.
Oh my gosh.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, so Sassy Magic Noir, and Sassy Magic Boutique. And then I also run a conference every Mother's Day weekend, so Mother's Day next year, called Sassy Con. So yeah, three shops, 1 conference, 2 books.
Cool.
Oh my gosh.
That's where we're at. Yeah.
That's amazing. What kind of things? I mean, is it solely vampiric based and sin eating and things that you're into for the SassyCon? Or like what do you who's going to be there?
Yeah, so I mean, depending on how into stuff people are, they might know these names or not. But I can tell people some of the more famous names. Christopher Penczak is going to be there. Matthew Venus is going to be there. He's writing the forward for my book, Living Vampires, and he's going to be there. Jamie Wagoner, she's the one who wrote Hades. She's going to be there. I'm going to be forgetting people. Ivo Dominguez Jr. wrote a lot of books, very famous in certain pagan and witchcraft circles, is going to be there. Oh my goodness, I've just met her and I'm going to butcher her name. So I'm just going to say Christine, but Scott Cunningham's sister, Christine. Okay. I want to say Ashworth. Christine, if you're watching, please forgive me if I got it wrong. She's going to be there, and she's going to be talking about Scott Cunningham. And for people that don't know Scott Cunningham, people have mixed opinions about Scott, but it can't be denied his impact on modern day Wicca. And so she's going to be talking about him. His book Wicca sold about 1 million copies, I think it is at this point. That's so amazing. Huge impact. Yeah, so those are the kind of more famous names. So we have some less famous people like myself and some others that are just more regionally known or very niche known. Those are the famous people. And so no, SassyCon is going to be, there's going to be pagan stuff, there's going to be witchcraft stuff, there's going to be some hoodoo talks. There's some crafting workshops. I will be doing a talk on vampirism. I'll also be doing a talk on metasurgery, which is a form of more advanced magic that we can do on our subtle bodies or energetic bodies. So yeah, it's going to be a whole mixture. It's going to be a whole mixed thing. So definitely not vampirism and sin eating focused. In fact, I'm not doing a sin eating talk next year at all. So far at all at any conference, I'm doing all new stuff, kind of promoting the Living Vampires book, right? So very cool, yeah. But yeah, so yeah, it's definitely not vampirism focused. There is stuff on vampirism there, but if people are like, well, that's kind of neat, but I don't want to go to a conference that's all about vampires. No. I'm actually thinking about doing something very small little vampirism conference in October in New Orleans. But SassyCon is a whole mixed bag of magical people and philosophies and traditions.
That's awesome. I love that.
I'm excited. I am planning on coming out for that.
That's awesome. Yeah. That'd be awesome to see you down here for that. That'd be great.
It'll be my first time in New Orleans. I have not been out there yet.
Oh my gosh. You definitely got to take some days either before or after then to take in the city. And that's the advantage we have, right? New Orleans is a destination city. So I encourage people not to just come down for SassyCon, but take a couple more days off and experience the city. because there's so many neat things to do here.
Yeah, I've always been fascinated by New Orleans. Like my whole life, I've wanted to go there. So yeah,
it is so worth it. Every person I've ever talked to loves it here, and for different reasons. With the culture, the food, the magic, the nightlife. They all love it, but maybe for different reasons, but they love it. And there's a lot to offer anybody here. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. That's very cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And it sounds like you're going to have some pretty incredible speakers that are coming, including yourself. Yeah,
I'm excited. I'm definitely excited.
How long has that been going on? Like, how many years has that been going on?
This year was our first year. So next year
will be
con number 2. Yeah.
Very cool. Right.
It's just been just one thing each year. So in 2022, we opened the first shop, 23, the second shop, 24, the third shop, 2025 was SassyCon. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Very nice. I'm curious about one thing. I had this one friend, and I'm curious about this, but she was what I would call an energy vampire because, no matter how much positivity you would throw at her, no matter how much, advice you would give her, or anything, that it always, and she'd be drawing this out of you, and by the time you were done talking to her, you were left just like, oh my God, I got to take a nap, One, would that be considered energy vampirism, right? And then 2, if she didn't know that she was doing that, let's say, and then she was made aware of those things, would she be able to kind of like get out of her doom and gloom and be healed as a result of acknowledging and maybe having an awakening that she might be an energy vampire or a vampire in general?
So it's a really interesting one that you talk about there, because we often hear about emotional vampires, right? Where they just sicken us and they kind of suck us dry. We're like, oh my goodness gracious. And in what we do in the shadows, Colin Robertson actually encounters what he calls an emotional vampire, and how she eats him and she drains him in a very similar way. And so there's this whole thing that goes on. And then it gets further conflated because there are vampires who feed on emotions in general, but they wouldn't necessarily be called emotional vampires in terms of like what society would call them. So it gets messy and convoluted. That person could be a vampire, or they could be vampiric.
I see.
They're taking the energy in, but they don't actually need it to function correctly. They're just sucking on people, right?
Gotcha.
Most people that I've met that people call emotional vampires are vampiric. They're not actually vampires. I've met some, but most of the ones, and this is anecdotal, of course, it's not like I've met every vampire on the planet. I've met hundreds, though. Most of the people that I've met that people would consider emotional vampires are just vampiric people.
I see.
And so depending on why they're doing that, is it a personality thing? Then they could get over it. If it's a mental illness thing or mental challenge, they can't necessarily get over it, right? It depends on what's going on. So if there's somebody who's suffering from, let's say, clinical depression or something else, or just kind of siphoning other people's energy, they might not be able to help that, right? Because it's something that's slightly uncontrolled for them. So it kind of depends. There's so many different circumstances on it. Now, if they were a vampire and they became aware of it, then yes, they could mitigate that absolutely if they chose to engage in vampirism in an ethical way.
Sure.
Because you'll constantly just kind of siphoning people on that level to the point where they're tired and not doing well, and just kind of like, man, I just don't want to be around this person anymore. I would say that's not ethical. I think they're crossing the line at that point.
Sure.
Other people would disagree with me, and that that's fine. They can disagree. Some of the things that I think are ethical, people might not consider ethical, right? So we all have our spectrum of what's ethical and what's not.
Sure.
But yeah, so that if they were actually a vampire, yes, they could awaken to it and they could stop it. If it's just a personality thing and they found out about it, they could stop it. If they were into magic, they could stop it. Maybe even if they weren't into magic. But if it's something that's kind of like a mental, some sort of medical thing going on, then they might not be able to.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I would say. So it's really a case by case basis.
That's cool. That's a very interesting way to look at it. And I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah.
Something Raven said earlier about like we have all these myths of vampirism. What's also interesting too is that sometimes it will intersect, and I talk about that in my book where there's some vampires that have issues with crossing running water. They can, but it feels kind of weird to them. So we talked about that. There's really rare cases where there's certain wards where if the vampire doesn't get an invitation, it could be a room. It's not even necessarily somebody's home. If they don't get an invitation, they'll affect the wards. So they're not kept out magically. They can still get in, but it feels weird. It's like those, if you've ever seen those pads where they're electrified for pets so they don't go in certain areas. So like the pet like walks on it.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
You know, it zaps them. Some wards are like that for certain vampires, unless they get an invite, and then it's kind of like turning off the pad temporarily. So the idea that you can't be invited, that you can't go into a home unless you're invited in, that's not true. But there are certain wards that will make it uncomfortable for the vampire unless they're invited in.
I see what you mean. Yeah.
So I talk about that intersection of myth versus reality, and where it does intersect. There's other things where it just doesn't intersect at all. You know, vampires are not physically immortal. You know, things like that. You know, you know, I talk about, you know, wooden stake will kill any vampire because we have a human body that will kill us. You know, like, anything magical that's going to kill anybody, right?
Yeah, right. That's kind of an inevitability, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I talk about that too. Like, okay, well, let's just be realistic here, folks. Yeah, that's going to kill a vampire because they're in a human body.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I talk about that intersection of myth versus reality and how that kind of looks.
I really like that approach because, like, you know, much like, you know, like with mediumship, I'm a medium. So like, I like to take the, what I say, the woo woo out of it a lot. And I think that's kind of a similar basis. It's like, you're taking a lot of, like, you know, you're bringing a realism to it, and you're showing that, like, this isn't, you know, this is, I'm trying to word this in a way, but like, it's a real thing, and people are really doing this, and there's a real connection that they're getting out of this as well. And so there's ethical aspects to it. There's parts of it that are, you know, myth based and non-myth based. And I think that having a grounded look at it, like you're talking about, is really cool, and I appreciate that. So
yeah, trying, definitely trying. I mean, the cosmology for vampirism can sometimes get out there, but we say it's a cosmology. It doesn't require belief. It's like, you know, every society, every subculture that's religious or mystical has origin stories, right? And so you know, those origin stories aren't necessarily required to believe in terms of being something or practicing it either. So I think we lost Raven again.
I think we did. Yeah, she
hear me, so that's good.
Yeah, I can still hear you. It seemed like every time somebody popped in and out, it was like I couldn't hear you. But so I also saw in your bio that you are a priest. Now, can you kind of elaborate on what that looks like for you?
Yeah. So okay, where to start with that? There's a thing called
loaded question, right?
There's a thing called apostolic succession.
Okay. And
apostolic succession is just a fancy term for when Christ laid his hands on the apostles. He's like, you dudes are my apostles now. And then the apostles did that to different disciples. They're like, you dudes are you know, go with God type of thing, right? They're laying their hands on them. That's apostolic succession. And what that means is that the Roman Catholic Church has this. It's the most famous one, that every priest, every bishop, when their hands are laid on them, they have a direct spiritual lineage all the way back to Christ. It's an initiation. So priests are initiated into this lineage of Christ, this spiritual lineage. Bishops are priests that have been elevated, consecrated as bishops. So that's that spiritual lineage. And it's called apostolic succession because it's basically succession from the apostles, descended from the apostles. And so the Roman Catholic Church is very famous for this. However, there's actually dozens of churches that have this. So churches that people might be familiar with are the Russian Orthodox Church, Ukrainian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, the Coptic Church, the Ethiopian Coptic Church. There's a Syriatic church. There's a Dutch church whose name I forget now. There's a liberal Catholic church as well as liberal Catholicism in kind of a spectrum. There's all these other churches. So there's dozens and dozens of them. That's just naming a few of them. And they all have apostolic succession too. So they're all descended from one of the apostles in terms of their spiritual lineage. And here in the West, what's not commonly known is some of our most famous practitioners were also Catholic bishops. They had this apostolic succession. Gerald Gardner, founder of Gardnerian Wicca, was a Catholic bishop. He was Catholic. He also identified as Muslim for a while. That's another story, but he was consecrated as a Catholic bishop. Aleister Crowley, you know, the notorious magician, you know, he was a Catholic bishop. He was a Gnostic Catholic bishop. So there's all these people. Charles Leadbeater, I believe he was Catholic bishop. I don't think he was the one who was a deacon. I think it was Eliphas Levi. I'm pretty sure Leadbeater was a Catholic bishop. There are some other famous people as well, but those are some of the main ones that people might know. And so, you know, back then, but back in that time period, the intersection of Catholicism and magic was just like, yeah, whatever, let's do it. Now it's very divided, right? Now it's very separated. how can you be a Christian witch? But that was the thing. You could be a Christian magician. You could be a Christian witch. That could happen. And so what happened was all these occultists were getting these apostolic successions or these apostolic initiations because they were curious, whether they were Christian and they wanted it, or they were curious about the power, or they're just thinking it was fun. Who knows what Crowley was thinking at the time? I'm not an expert enough on him to know. But Gardner seemed to be searching for something because he kind of jumped around a lot with regards to his spirituality. And no shade, I think that's a good thing. He was exploring things. So all of these people were grabbing these apostolic lines. And then in Turtle Island or North America, what ended up happening was a bunch of occultists got together and said, wait a second, what if one of us is wrong? What if the lineage that we think we have isn't correct? And so they all laid hands on each other, and they merged the streams. So unlike Ghostbusters are like, don't cross the streams, you merge and cross the streams. And so now there's all these occultists over the last 30 to 50 years where they have multiple lines of apostolic succession. They're descended from multiple churches, and that made it even more accessible. So I was actually initiated into that succession. So I think it's really funny because I was initiated into it in New Orleans by a Jewish woman from Toronto, Canada, which is where I used to live. so she's culturally, Jewish, not religiously anymore. So that's how I got into it. So I'd always been fascinated by it. I always thought that might be a path that I wanted, and then I was finally able to pursue that. So I'm actually a Catholic bishop, but I tend to just go by father formally because it's still weird to me, quite honestly. It's like I'm just like, wait, what? This is reality.
I know, right? Yeah.
So I usually just go by father, if anything at all, and so that's why I usually say I'm a priest, because all bishops are priests. It's just not all priests are bishops. Bishops have just been consecrated to a slightly different level, where bishops can now. So I can ordain priests, whereas priests can't ordain other priests. That's honestly the main difference. So I descend from multiple Catholic lines. My Roman Catholic line arguably ended in the 1920s or 19-teens. That Roman Catholic bishop was excommunicated for calling out corruption in the church. So while I consider myself to have a Roman Catholic line, the Roman Catholics would probably be horrified by that. And technically my Roman Catholic line is from 100 years ago. So I do have that lineage too, though.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. That is cool.
So that's kind of it in a nutshell. So I describe it very broadly as liberal Catholicism, although there's also a liberal Catholic Church, and so not to be confused with that. And with liberal Catholicism, again, it's a bit of a misnomer because on the right of the spectrum, it could look like Roman Catholic stuff, but not be Roman Catholic. On the left of the spectrum, it's a person running naked in the woods. Like that sort of thing, doing something, right? So I'm right of center with regards to my Catholicism. I'm not running around naked in the woods, but neither am I strict to Roman Catholic mass either. But I'm definitely right of center in terms of what it looks like, and not to be confused with politics. It's not politics. It's just traditional versus not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you find that being that, and then also being a sin eater, and then also being a vampire, that sometimes those things intersect together?
Yep.
Generally speaking, they don't, which is interesting because a lot of my stuff does intersect and that sort of thing. But for the sin eating, I treat it in such isolation. Sin eating for me is service work. I'm completely in service when I do it. It's why I don't charge for it other than my expenses and what would have been the charge for it back in the day, but just with modern currency, because I see it as service work. So I guess in that way it overlaps because my Catholicism is also service work. So there is some overlap that way. But when I do the sin eating, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not praying. I'm not engaging in vampirism. I'm only doing the ritual. So in that sense, it's very isolated. I don't see my vampirism as service work at all. There's a rare case, like I've taught certain students how to be vampiric because they have certain medical conditions, and being vampiric alleviates those conditions somewhat. It doesn't cure them, but alleviates some of the symptoms. So you could argue that's service work, but if they're students, is it really service work? You get into, again, gray area. It can be, I guess, depending on the student. And with my Catholicism, I see, again, the sitting is separate because I can take confession from people. Interestingly enough, people are more comfortable with the sin eating than they are with confession. So for me, they don't really intersect very much. Other than the Catholicism, the sin eating I see as service work. So in that sense, yes, That's where they intersect for me. That'd be the intersection, would be service work. But otherwise, I guess actually, so I guess with the vampirism too, because the way I do readings is how I was trained in a vampire order. So my readings I consider to be service work too. So that's probably the intersection, Raven. So there is an intersection, service work. That's how they all intersect. Otherwise, they really don't.
Gwen is asking, what does your church think about the other things that you are interested in and do?
Yeah, so when I go to Catholic church, I don't talk about it with Roman Catholics because most of them are pretty horrified, Gwen. Yeah. So, and there isn't what I would call a liberal Catholic church that I would attend here in New Orleans. People have actually been saying that I need to start my own congregation. I'm like, I don't want that responsibility at all.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot. So yeah. So they generally don't know. Having said that, though, for anybody who is interested, I'll quickly plug it. It's another person's thing, but you guys will call it this. Canadians call it May 24 weekend. It's a May 24th weekend, like somewhere around there. So basically 2 weekends after SassyCon, there is a Christian Witches Convention. And so if you look up Christian Witches, there's a Christian Witches Convention, and it's pretty wild. It's awesome. And for them, they think it's amazing. And we're all different types of Christian witches. So there's one who's a pastor. There's one who sees Christ as kind of like an ascended master. There's myself, who can, is Catholic bishop, Catholic priest. There's others that just are like, Christ consciousness focused, that sort of thing. So yeah, anybody who's kind of interested in that intersection of Christianity and magic, there's a Christian Witches Convention every year in New Orleans, 2 weeks after SassyCon. So right around May 24th.
That's cool.
And they like it. They think it's cool. So
I do have a few friends that would probably be interested in that because they consider themselves to be Christian witches.
Yeah, then I would highly encourage them to check it out. They can also, I believe hopefully if it's working, I'm live streaming to my personal Facebook profile as well as my author page. And anybody, if they want, they can reach out to me and I can put them in touch with the one who organizes that event. I don't organize it. I'm an attendee. I have nothing to do with it. I'm only speaking of it because it's kind of come up because of what we're talking about. But I think it's a great event. My plan is to go every year, and it's very chill, very welcoming, and you learn a lot.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So another fun question. What are your thoughts on the paranormal? Because there's a lot of our viewers that are very engaged in paranormal activities and investigations and that kind of thing. And I'm always intrigued by what my friends think about it that I haven't been on investigations with before.
So what? Give me the 2-sentence definition of what you consider the paranormal to be, and then I can give you my opinion on what because, or do you want me to just use my definition?
Use your definition, because my definition is probably not the usual construct of what people consider to be paranormal.
Okay. So, I mean, and I'm not going to die on this hill because I don't usually identify things as paranormal, right? I just talk about them as magical or spiritual. But for me, when I think paranormal, I think things that we can't necessarily explain. To me, you've got cryptids, you've got UFOs, you've got ghosts and goblins and that sort of thing, ghoulies and things like that, what's going on here, right? That's kind of like, I would, broad strokes, kind of throw stuff into there. So in terms of cryptids, I don't really have an opinion. It's not my thing. And in terms of UFOs, I mean, they're technically unidentified flying objects. So yes, they exist. Now, the subtext, of course, are there aliens? I actually talk about this in my book because I talk about transspecies and what that means. And so, yeah, I do believe in aliens. I'm not like, I'm not like a tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist or anything like that. But I do believe in them. And in Living Vampires, I talk about, why, what is transspecies and how it intersects with the idea of aliens, and also how it intersects with the idea of reincarnation. So I believe in that. And then whether or not they come here or not, like in their ships or not, I don't know. I don't really have an opinion on it. Again, it's not my area. But the main thing for paranormal for me would be ghosts. And yeah, for sure. We in the Kheprian order, we deal with the disembodied all the time. Witches call them the glorious dead. Other people call them the ancestors. So we're dealing with beings and entities and ghosts and things like that on a pretty constant basis. Here in New Orleans, they're everywhere. It's basically a giant necropolis. So for me, it's very, very real. My house is incredibly haunted. Having said that, even though I believe in some really wild stuff, I'm also a big skeptic. And so there's a lot of stuff that I've debunked in my own house where I'm like, nope, it was this, and it's all like physical and scientific. There's other stuff that I cannot debunk, and I don't know if I ever will. So I believe in ghosts, but I also believe that a lot of it can be explained by science in terms of like, oh, it was actually just this. And in my house, I've had both. I've had, oh, okay, no, that was just this contraption doing this. And in other cases, I'm like, I don't know what that was. I'm pretty sure that was a ghost. So I've definitely had both. And then also in that kind of spectrum of ghosts, I have something that I call imprints. And an imprint might appear to be a ghost, but they're not. So think of it as like a video on repeat. And so I have that in my house as well. It's just a video on repeat. And that woman that I'm seeing like in my house, she's not actually there. And the way that I tell the difference is, do they ever interact with anybody? And if they don't, it's probably an imprint. And that's what she is. So I have all three. I have science stuff that look like ghosts. I have ghosts, and then I have one imprint that I'm aware of. So I would put that as paranormal too, where it's just kind of burned, right? It's burned into the home. There's a famous one about a Roman or a group of Romans marching down what used to be a road in England. And now that the soil's built up, they're basically half in the ground and half out because it's actually been almost like, I forget how many feet, but it's a number of feet of soil that we have now compared to 2,000 years ago. And so they're still walking on what they consider to be the road, but the road is a few feet below the modern road. Right. And that's an imprint, that's all they ever do is march. They never interact with anybody. They're not going up and going where the road is now. So that would be an imprint as an example. So that's kind of what I consider the paranormal to be. I mean, I believe it's very real. I think if you believe in magic, it's hard not to believe in paranormal things. And it doesn't mean that you're required to believe in everything. I mean, there might be magical practitioners that don't believe in aliens or don't believe in cryptids and stuff like that. And that's fine. I tend to be open to everything, but also skeptical at the same time, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
I have a deep respect for that because it's good to have good skepticism alongside with the belief that things are out there, in my opinion.
Yep.
Exactly.
I fully agree. I think that skepticism is a very healthy thing. I think that cynicism is where you draw the line, or should draw the line. Like if you're just cynical about everything, then there's no benefit to that. But if you're skeptical, then there's the open-mindedness that's still there at least.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think too, like for magic, going back to magic for a second, as best you can, you want to make sure that you're not being delusional, because if you're being delusional, then it takes away from the very real magic. And so that's why you need to be skeptical as a magical practitioner, whether it's for your spell work, for your as a medium, investigations, anything, because it helps keep you from being delusional. And that's important. It's important.
Absolutely. Yep. It's funny because I always used to say that there's a difference between mental health and mediumship. You know what I mean? Yeah. And just like what you were saying, kind of the same thing. If you're delusional, mental health stuff, there is a difference between this stuff, and it's important to know the difference.
Yeah. Whenever you can, absolutely.
Whenever you can, exactly. Yeah.
And sometimes it will look the same. Like I've seen people where and I'm not making light at all. It's just this is what I've seen where they're talking to the air, and and I'll look energetically, and sometimes they're, from my perspective, they're just talking to the air. And then other times they're talking to something that's there, and I'm pretty sure they've created it. So they've created this thought form or this servitor. So they've created something. And then in other cases, it actually is something external. It's a spirit messing with them. In all three cases, the outside looking in, it just looks like somebody's talking to the air. But in one case, it's air. In another case, they've created. In another case, they're being tormented. So, so sometimes it's very hard to differentiate for sure.
Go ahead.
Oh shit! I tried to cut myself off before you heard it. So it kind of leads me to a point where you had talked about spiritual vampires, right? Is there? Well, I guess I'm going to ask two questions in the same one, and I'm sorry for that. But is there an ethical code within that for the person in spirit who is a vampire? And then two, how can you identify that as somebody who might be in paranormal investigating or somebody who is a medium? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's some schools of thought that there's beings that are vampires that have always been vampires. They've never been in a human body. I've encountered a couple where people have said that that's what they are. I don't know. They were vampires. Whether or not they've never been in a human body, I'm not sure. There is that. Those that I've encountered that are like that are kind of inhuman, they don't really seem to have much of an ethical code because they're just operating on a different thought process.
Sure.
So from a human perspective, they have no ethics. Whether that's accurate or not, it's just they're just doing their thing.
That makes total sense to me, though.
Yeah, so that's the one thing. Disembodied vampires, so the ones that are basically ghosts, or we call them the disembodied. I find they tend to be generally more relaxed with their ethics. I think it's just a different perspective when they're in subtle reality as opposed to with a physical body. It varies a lot, though. Like some seem to be more ethical than others. So it really is a spectrum, just kind of like vampires, living vampires that are in a body. It really does, it's a huge spectrum of ethics. Again, most are kind of in the middle somewhere, but some kind of go very one way in terms of like being very predatory, and then others are very like, do I have your consent to even shake your hand? Like that sort of thing, right?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Somewhere in the middle, somewhat. So the disembodied ones tend to be a little bit more relaxed with their ethics, is what I found, for whatever reason. Having said that, though, anything not in a body, almost all entities, they're all vampiric. So I think there's also that going on too, where they're siphoning energy if they want to, anyways. A lot of them, but there are also, of course, the disembodied vampires. So yeah, so it's similar, but it seems to be more relaxed, is what I would say.
And how would you protect yourself against maybe the ones that were not incarnate, that don't have that ethical kind of viewpoint?
So I do it the same way with a physical one. So I talk about this in the book, of course, but the best way for that is so a lot of people will say shield, and I always kind of giggle because I'm like, okay, so it's a vampire feeding on energy. And they're like, yes. I'm like, okay. And you're going to make a shield. And they're like, yes. Okay. The shield's energy, right? And they're like, yes. But is a vampire feeding on energy? Right.
Yeah, right. So by shield, right? Yeah.
So what happens is people think that they're shielding from the vampire, and all the vampire is doing is eating the shield. So now they're just not feeling it directly. And so it makes them feel better, but they're still being depleted of their energy. It just happens to be their shield now, right? So now, having said that, there is a shield that works. And the shield that works is what I call, I've designed it. I call it the slippery shield. And the slippery shield is what's called the basic boundary shield. I talk about magical tools, talk about it in Living Vampires as well, which is a sphere of energy around you. A lot of other books will say put the white light around you, whatever, but it's a sphere of energy. White, electric blue, off-white, like a light gray sort of thing, typically are the default colors. But when you do this bubble of energy, you make it slippery. So think of it almost like ice, not reflective. That's also important. It's not reflective, but it's slippery, and slippery enough that nothing can kind of like grab a hold of it. So like almost like black ice, if you've ever experienced that. My southern neighbors, I know you don't really know what I'm talking about. So just think like really slippery and not reflective. And,
I'm in Maine, so I know all about black ice.
And so when you do that, what happens is when vampires will send out tendrils. So it's almost like fishing line. And they send it out to go into the person's subtle body. And when the tendril comes out and starts going towards the person, if it hits the slippery shield, it literally slips off. It can't attach. Okay. And so there are ways around that, which I don't teach people. More experienced vampires know how to get around it. It's actually very easy to get around it if you know what you're doing. But most vampires don't know on that level how to get around it because it's so rare to encounter that shield. And so in most cases, if you do that, then the vampire will typically go looking for somebody else because now it's just too much effort to feed on the person. So that's if you can get the shield up before they start getting their hooks into you, quite literally. If they were already feeding on you, then you got to cut those links. So it's basically like a cord cutting, but energetically cutting the links and then putting up that shield. But yeah, the slippery shield is very, very effective. It's one of the most effective defensive techniques where you're not going on the offensive against the vampire. It's the most effective defensive technique that there is without being aggressive, because it's not remotely aggressive. So
that's very cool.
Yeah, that's the best way. There's aggressive ways too, but that's the best defensive, non-aggressive way.
Nice. That's awesome.
Do you feel like when I have heard certain circumstances where when someone is fed on, they tend to have dreams about that person specifically, that is feeding on them without them knowing. Is that something that is common, or is that just maybe a one-time thing that this person brought up to me?
So it can happen. So to do that, we have to quickly delve into different ways of feeding. So, we've talked about elemental and sexual and stuff like that, but that's more like the medium. But there's also how you're feeding in terms of, is it ambient, is it surface, is it direct, or is it deep? So ambient feeding is like you're walking down Bourbon Street here in New Orleans, or you're at a concert. If you've never experienced New Orleans, you're at a concert or you're at a bar and everybody's dancing and everybody's having a great time. Church, and everybody's like pumping up the energy. and you basically are just scooping the energy that's excess. It's all the energy that people are giving off. You're not actually directly touching anybody. That's ambient feeding. No one is ever going to have a dream about a vampire because of that, because the vampire is not even directly touching them. Sure. So if they're ambiently feeding, no, absolutely not. The next one is surface feeding. And the surface feeding is like, to put it in a physical sense, you don't have to have physical touch, but just to have a physical sense, a handshake, a quick hug, a kiss on the cheek, maybe a quick kiss on the lips, that sort of thing, patting on the back, that sort of thing. That's kind of the physical versions of surface feeding. So it's a quick touch. It's a quick energetic touch. It's a little energetic kiss, if you will. And again, the person's not going to have dreams about the vampire. The only way that they would either be through deep feeding or direct feeding. Direct feeding is like a direct feed. So now you're holding the person for a while. You're kissing them for a while. Sexual feeding is direct feeding. That is direct feeding. When vampires engage in sex and they feed that way, that's direct feeding. At minimum, sometimes it's deep. If you do that often enough, yes, the person could start having dreams about the vampire. Deep feeding, it's pretty common to have dreams about the vampire and vice versa, because deep feeding, you're going even deeper than that direct feed. And I talk about all that and how that works in my book. However, there are also vampires who deliberately and accidentally subtle reality travel or astral travel, and they will go into people's dreams either accidentally or on purpose to feed. So when we talk about this person having dreams about the vampire might actually be coming into their dreams either deliberately or accidentally. And that happens fairly often as well. And when they do that, that's a direct feed or a deep feed, depending on how they're doing it.
That's interesting. Would the vampire doing it be more of a lucid dreamer in that sense, or is it something that's not even in their consciousness? You know what I mean?
So you can do it via lucid dreaming as well. However, most vampires who do it actually do it through subtle reality travel or astral travel. So they're going while they're conscious and
all right,
they're traveling out of body, and that's how they do it. And they go either in people's dreams or just over there in general remotely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
And this is going maybe a tad bit deeper, and let me know if this is going too deep at the moment. But like with metasurgery, for example, metasurgery, you're energetically shifting something within yourself. You're not necessarily like on an astral level, you're changing and shifting something, correct? So it's not something where you're like, it's not like a shield that you would use. It's more of like you're shifting energy, or you're changing a soul or a psychic energy, correct?
Kind of, sort of. So metasurgery, you're typically affecting structure in some way, as opposed to just raw energy. So, with metasurgery, it can be very here, lower self, so our subtle bodies that are here, that are kind of mirrors of our physical bodies. Or it could be at a high level where you're affecting very close to the higher self. It depends on how high you're going with the metasurgery and what you're trying to do. So examples of very here would be altering people's energy meridians or their energy channels, moving them into different areas, making them larger, making them smaller, affecting a chakra, removing a chakra, molding the subtle body, almost like Play-Doh or clay, adding armoring to somebody, energetically speaking, removing armoring if they've got it, that sort of thing. Metasurgery can also incorporate things like very nasty attacks. It can also incorporate things like programming, where you actually put metasurgical filament into somebody to try and affect their outlook on things. So think of it almost like a, not really, but almost like a magical hypnosis, if you will. So metasurgery can be a lot. And then when you do it at a higher level, that's where you start getting into things that are, for our all intents and purposes, permanent. So here on the lower self, anything you do once the person dies, it's going to be gone. It's going to kind of like wiped clean, or it could be just gone within a few minutes or a few hours, depending on what you're doing. What I'll be teaching in metasurgery at Convocation in February, I believe I'm teaching it. I know I'm speaking. I haven't confirmed what class I'm doing. I'm going to be teaching the metasurgery that basically fades away after a few minutes or a few hours. I'm going to be teaching that level of it at Convocation. So, but when you do it at a high level, it lasts for multiple lifetimes, or for all intents and purposes, permanently. So it depends on what you're doing with the metasurgery. But yeah, you're affecting structure as opposed to like depleting somebody's energy. Like metasurgery isn't like a drain or a feeding technique. It's a magical technique that anybody can learn. It's just a number of vampires engage in metasurgery, but there's some non-vampires that do too, that do what I would call metasurgery. Christopher Penczak, in his book Instant Magic, talks about going into somebody's subtle body and drawing out an illness and how he perceives it. I would consider that metasurgery. Other people call it psychic surgery. I shy away from that because a lot of the term psychic surgery, people see physical things where they're pulling out nails and stuff from people, and there's some things about whether or not that's real or not. And so that's why we call it metasurgery, because we're not doing anything physical at all. It's all energetic, but it's affecting structure, if that makes sense, as opposed to just the person's energy in general.
It definitely does. So if somebody is, for example, this young lady that had talked to me, she was saying that like she had this dream about this person, this vampire that she felt was coming into her dreams, and she felt that he had shifted something within that dynamic. That's not necessarily considered metasurgery, right? Or is it?
What did he shift, allegedly?
Allegedly he shifted her dynamic on how she like views her astral world, is what she was telling me.
That could be metasurgery, but it's I mean, you know, first, of course, we have to rule out that she's not being delusional, right? We have to rule out that there isn't like an illness going on there. Assuming those two things are the case, then that sounds more like an energetic attack to me than anything. If the shift was a negative shift, if it was a positive shift, it could be some sort of energetic healing. It could have been metasurgery, but what you're roughly describing can be accomplished without it, in my opinion.
Makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I would say, because you can boost and also cut off people's access to spirit, and that's not metasurgery. That's just a really lovely or really nasty technique, depending on whether you're using it for healing or for harm. And I wouldn't call that metasurgery. It is advanced though. I'd say it's more advanced, but I wouldn't call it metasurgery per se.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That hopefully that helps her, because I know she's watching. So.
Well, so what I would say for that is like if it's still happening, then she needs dream protection, which is my third book. So my third book is home protection, and I talk about protecting yourself in dreams and stuff like that. So that unfortunately won't come out for a while, but it sounds like she might need dream protection. So if she looks that up, there are some books specifically on dream magic that might help her. There's some, she can do shielding around her bed. So if it's the vampire, she might want to do like the slippery shield around her bed before she goes to sleep. And then the other option too, if she's cool with working with outside entities, Morpheus is amazing. The Greek god Morpheus for dreams and dream work, and he'll negotiate with you, and he will teach you things, both defensive and offensive offensive and defensive dream magic, depending on what you're willing to pay. So that's another option as well. If she's cool with going to an outside source, I highly recommend Morpheus. Very, very cool stuff that he can do.
Sweet. Yeah, I hope that helps her.
Hopefully. Otherwise, she might have to wait for the third book to come out. But either one of my books would help her with defensive techniques energetically for sure. There's, of course, other books out there too. But if it's specifically for vampire and she needs help now, my book or the other book, Boulanger's book, The Psychic Vampire Codex, might also help her out. I would say Magic Without Tools or M. Boulanger's book, that book specifically, those are the two that would be out right now that might help her kind of learn the techniques that she might need to know to kind of help safeguard her. Not specifically for dreams, but in general. When Living Vampires comes out, it would definitely help her. So.
Awesome. So if somebody views themselves as a vampire, or they have questions about it, and they may want to reach out to someone trustworthy, how could they reach you to ask questions?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am Sean Wilde. So as my name looks here on the show, on Facebook, I'm still accepting things on my personal Facebook profile, because I'm always talking about magic in some form or another. So it's really not a big deal if people want to add me as a Facebook friend. I also have an author page on Facebook too. I'm on Instagram, Sean Wilde Author, all one word. So Instagram, if they want to get me potentially more quickly, Instagram is a great way, because I will get notifications on my phone usually, whereas I don't have my Facebook messages coming up on my phone because there's too many. I get too many beeps and bongs on Facebook. So if it's something kind of urgent, then Instagram might be good. If they just want to reach out to me in general, Facebook is typically good, because then when I can sit down at the computer and read messages, then I can respond that way. Because if it's a lot to type, it's Facebook. If it's a quick voice to text, Instagram's great. Or if I know them well enough where we can do an Instagram audio, I'll do that too. So yeah, Instagram or Facebook, either of those or both are great ways to reach out to me.
Awesome. Well, Chris, do you have any other questions?
I do actually. I have one more. You know,
Okay.
if you don't mind.
No worries. No, I'm good.
Just recently, when you and Raven were talking, you had talked about potentially cutting off their connection to spirit. Can you elaborate on what you meant by that?
Oh goodness. Well, that gets into nasty stuff.
Okay.
We want to end on that. So
well, we don't have to end on that, but I was just, maybe you could shoot me a private message, but I just was, you said, I was like, huh, that made me think, but totally up to you. I don't.
Well, so this doesn't necessarily cut people off from spirit, although it can temporarily. So I'll give you an example. There's lots of ways of disrupting things, right? So if we look at it physically, right, Chris? So like, let's say you and I are sitting in a room together, we're chatting, and then somebody comes in like, ooh, and they're kind of moving between us. We can't see each other, and we're going like this, trying to see each other. They're disrupting our communication. They're disrupting our flow, right?
Okay. Yep.
And if they don't stand in front of us, and instead they just start screaming or banging pots and pans, they're disrupting our flow, right? They're distracting.
Right.
And so there's ways of distracting the person, even if they're not conscious of it, or disrupting their flow with anything, whether that's their magic, their communication with ancestors, their communication with their deities. There's ways of disrupting it, right?
Okay.
So and it also comes down to what kind of practitioner are you like? That's one of the reasons why I wrote Magical Tools. I call it street magic, where I try and get people to be able to do magic in the bar, at the mall, while they're walking down the street. No ritual required. Because if you always have to go into your room and do ritual, then how are you going to use your magic on the fly, right?
That's brilliant.
So that's what I'm trying to teach people in all my books, generally speaking. And so depending on the practitioner, that jumping around in front of us might not be distracting. Whereas earlier tonight, I got distracted from Raven's background noise because I got really distracted because when I try and talk, I'm distracted really easily. With my magic, I'm not distracted that easily. So it depends, right? So we all have our thresholds. So that's something to bear in mind. So one really nasty attack, but also defense, is it's an inverse mirror shield. So a lot of pagans and witches will use a shield called a mirror shield. And it's that sphere of energy around you. And then you make it mirrored, reflective. And what happens is whenever anybody throws anything at you, it gets reflected back on them. And that's called a mirror shield, a very common shield that a lot of witches and practitioners will use. What is less common is called an inverse mirror shield. And so you take that sphere of energy and you make it reflective, but you turn it inside. So it's a mirrored on the inside and you put it on somebody. And so now whenever they try and send energy out, it's reflecting back on them. It doesn't cut them off from things per se, but if they're trying to attack you and hurt you, if you do an inverse mirror shield on them, suddenly they're just hitting themselves with anything that they do. And so that's just one kind of lighter example that is kind of achievable by most people that you can do to kind of like interfere with the wavelength, interfere with the communication, right? So depending on how they communicate with deity or how they communicate with spirit, if they're literally kind of sending out almost like a ping, if there's an inverse mirror shield on them, it might actually get reflected back.
Wow. Okay.
So you can temporarily disrupt their communication until they figure it out.
That's interesting.
So that's one way. There's lots of ways, but that's like one way. Metaphysically speaking, you look at affecting the crown chakra, you look at affecting, the third eye. There's also other ways of just kind of temporarily blocking it. People have cords to everything. They have energetic links. Vampires are very familiar with this because we create links whenever we feed and whenever we exchange energy. All people do. When they exchange energy, they create links. So if you know the right link to look for, you can disrupt that link or tie it off or cut it. So there's lots of ways you can disrupt the communication. The inverse mirror shield is the easiest way and honestly least nasty way. The other ones kind of get nastier and require more skill. But there are lots of ways. I'm happy to talk to you more about it offline. But there are definitely ways. So
I really enjoyed the analogy, like you just had said, about how somebody's like screaming at you and it kind of, how are you, or like you're teaching somebody how to do magic in a bar, right? Throughout coming up in mediumship, I did a lot of it at conventions. You know what I mean? I'd be doing readings at conventions, so much noise going around in the background. People are like, is this setting really going to work? And I had trained myself to be able to still do it. Just recently in September, there was a convention in Maine and they were coming over the loudspeaker. I was right in the middle of a reading, big loudspeakers booming over. And I'm like, I could barely even hear myself, but I was still talking and delivering the message. So I think that's such a vital skill. And I'm glad you brought that up. So it's very neat. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Yeah. And I agree. It absolutely is. And that's my goal of my books is to make people stronger practitioners.
Yes.
And to me, if you can do what I call street magic, you're a stronger practitioner just by virtue of being able to do that. Because a lot of people can't.
Sure. Yeah.
You know? So
I love it.
And what you just said is that's street magic to me. Like you were at a convention, you were inside. That's still street magic. If you can do mediumship when there's a loudspeaker going on and there's people like la, 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 all around you. That's street magic to me, which is super cool. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
There is so many amazing, fascinating things about vampirism and everything that you do. Like, I think we could talk for hours with you about everything.
I know. Such a wealth of knowledge. It's been a blast talking to you, man, honestly. And it's truly a pleasure to meet you, you know?
It's been a pleasure to be on the show. I had a lot of fun. I'm really glad that Raven asked me.
Hell yeah. Nice.
It was important to me because, okay, so Chris, I met Sean, what was it? How many years ago now? 2 years? 1, 2, 3?
2, maybe 3.
Might be 3 years ago. I had gone down to California, and there was this class that was being held at one of the stores out there, and it was my first time interacting with any of the groups of vampires that were down there in person. And I remember meeting Sean, and we were doing this energy thing, and so I had volunteered to go ahead and do it. And as Sean was walking towards me, I started seeing all these sigils and things going around, and I had no idea what they meant. And I'm starting to understand little tidbits of it. And it's just been amazing because, Sean, you're such a wealth of knowledge, and I love that you're authentic about everything that you do. And I just appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That's really kind of you. I appreciate it. I'd forgotten about that exercise, but as soon as you said, I'm like, oh, I know what you're talking about. And I love that exercise because people immediately, if they didn't know already, that's when they realize that magic is real because they can feel it. They can feel it and they can sense the energy. And I love doing that talk. If I could do more talks at conventions, that'd be like one of the ones I would always do because it's an immediate awakening moment for people. Vampire or not, just awakening to magic. So it's a super cool talk to do.
Yeah. I know you had said something about possibly ruffling some feathers earlier with some of the ways that you go about and believe with certain things, but I think keep doing you, man. Like ruffle those feathers and just be authentically yourself. You know what I mean? If people don't like it, then, you know, that's on them.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I think that there's going to be a lot of people out there who are vampires or energies that are out there that are really going to learn a lot from the books that you've created. And we need more authenticity within the vampiric world. Not that there isn't, there is. It's just some people aren't as authentic about what they do, and you very much are.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It is a breath of fresh air for sure.
Thanks, CT. I appreciate it.
Cool. Well, it has been an hour and 30 minutes. Thank you so much for being on the show. Gwen, did you want to come up and ask anything before we close?
I have questions, but I tell you what, I'm just going to message you one day, Sean. We could, I know you don't want to be here till 4 a.m. So.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but it's you guys. It's been a great show, and I'm gonna pop back. I'm gonna pull Sean back. Sean, thank you for coming on. If you want to hang out and say something to them, let's go ahead and end the show. You guys did good. It's an hour and a half, and it just flew by. So
it did fly by. Holy cow!
You guys are awesome. So I'm gonna pop back, and I'm gonna pop him back, and then you guys finish out for me. Okay?
Sounds good. Thank you again, Sean.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
I am so happy we did this show tonight.
Now I can't hear you.
Oh no!
Oh my goodness! It seems like they pop out, and then I can't hear you. I wonder if
I'm not sure. We're gonna have to work on that in the next week. But she was saying that she was so glad you had the show and Sean as a guest. And what else, Raven?
We'll have our translator up, right?
Yeah, translator.
Just that I could have honestly, we could have gone for hours and hours and hours,
Yes.
and I probably would have still had a million questions. But I have Sean on Facebook, so I can just message him.
Well, that's cool. All right, guys, you want to just tell everybody good night, and I'll say it from All Access myself and anybody who's listening. Have a Merry Christmas and a safe holiday. Okay, however you celebrate, just be safe and enjoy family and friends.
All right. Good night.
I echo that.
All right. Have a good night.
Take care, guys.
Good night.